today we have the very recognizable parable of Lazarus and the rich man. And normally speaking, when I've given a sermon about this, I have focused on the fact that we use this passage, or we use this parable as Jesus' way of telling us that you cannot initiate contact with the dead. So the spiritualists and the tarot cards and the Ouija boards and all of that stuff, because when the rich man asks, can you send Lazarus now to go to my brothers and tell them of what my fate is? And Abraham's answer is no, because there's a great chasm and that cannot be crossed. So normally that's kind of where the sermon goes. But as with all of Scripture, there are multiple meanings in each one of the stories, the pericopes, or the parables. In this particular one, there's something that can speak also to who we are and what we wrestle with in life. Now, in order to really fulfill this, you have to look at Luke's previous material. If you go backwards one, you will find sometimes it's entitled the shrewd manager or the unrighteous manager, okay? And then if you go back one even further, then you'll see the parable of the prodigal son. So when you put these three together, you have a tying force or a tying implication here, and that is with the Old Testament and now the New Testament in terms of what Christ has commanded us to do. So if we look at each one of these three, and again, they're familiar, right? The prodigal son, we know that one. The shrewd steward, just briefly to mention that again. So there's a rich man, and he has a manager of his estate. Okay, but he has been using that estate to his credit, and he's been managing it incorrectly. And then it turns out that he straightens himself up, and then he manages it correctly, and the master says, well done. And then we have the reading today of Lazarus and the rich man. So we know those three now, okay? Each one of them is a squandering of talents. In the first one, we have the prodigal son who receives the inheritance from the father at his command. Give me my inheritance, I want it now. And what does he do? He squanders it. In the steward, we have the same thing. We have the manager squandering the inheritance and the wealth of his master, the rich man. And here in Lazarus and the rich man, what squandering do we have here? He's squandering his wealth because he distributes it only for his own sake. So because the gospel is very specific, right? It says Lazarus sits outside the gate, so clearly the rich man can see him, but it says he feasts sumptuously, and then he doesn't even give him then the crumbs. So he is squandering now what we are supposed to be doing. So in each one of these cases, these are things that can apply to us. People have given us things, and we, like the unrighteous steward, have not used those resources properly. Maybe we got a loan from somebody, maybe somebody gave us some tools to borrow or something, and we squandered those, we used those incorrectly. In the prodigal son, unfortunately, I do hear many times where people looking for their parents' inheritance have said, hey, it's my money, can't I get it now? There used to be a commercial about that. Was that, it's my money and I want it now. I'm trying to remember who that was. J.G. Wentworth. That's it, J.G. Wentworth. Okay, and then in Lazarus and the rich man, we have that same squandering, okay? So we're seeing ourselves in each one of these three. But there has to be then the antithesis of this. What is the good example then? And that's the connection that we have with the Old Testament. Because, and in fact, one of them is named in this gospel today. So the one is Abraham. Now, look at Abraham. When we compare him to the prodigal son, okay, Abraham did have an inheritance, and he was going to give that entire inheritance to his servant, his chief servant, Eleazar. In the shrewd manager, God told him that you are going to be in charge of many nations, that he was building up many nations. So he was in charge not only of his household, but he was then in charge of these many nations, the nation of Israel. And then also, when we look at Lazarus and the rich man, just like the rich man, it says Abraham now was enriched in all things and blessed by God. And the second example that we have is we have Job. Job was also listed as one of the greatest men of the people of the East. Job was also in charge of his household. And it says he had wealth and he had money and he was taking care. And then here, Job demonstrates that with his wealth, he made sure that he fed the poor, he clothed the needy, and then he visited those people that were in jail and who were captured and helped those people. So when we look at these three together, we have what we sometimes are, which is the prodigal son squandering the inheritance, the shrewd manager squandering those assets that have been entrusted to us, or like Lazarus and the rich man, that we see where we should use our talents and we look aside and we say, I would prefer that I save my money for this because if I give him any money, he's just going to spend it in a way that I don't think is appropriate. So let's not worry about him. And move ourselves from that to what is the examples that have been given to us in Abraham and Job, which is that we see what our inheritance is and we are proper stewards of that inheritance. Like the shrewd manager, that those assets that are given to us, we use them properly. And then finally, in terms of Lazarus and the rich man, that we keep our eyes open for those that are in need and give what it is that we can give to help those people. This is one of the main reasons why it's important for us to have the donation box in the back, to have a relationship with Asbury and the other communities that we have here. Because if we stay just to ourselves, then we are the rich men, and we have then the needy outside of our gates, which we don't want to look at. So we just put up a couple of curtains there and just say, hey, they're not out there. We're good in our church. Everything is good. We're making some good money. So we stay only to ourselves. And the message that is given here by listing Abraham by name in the scripture is that we have to go outside of our community and we have to do those things that are important and show us as good stewards of all of the riches that God has blessed us with.